Oh, good morning. You know, we live in an age where it seems like there are video cameras and microphones just about everywhere. I mean, it seems like most people have one on their phone, but it didn't used to be that way. And back in the 1940s, as television was taking off, there was a fellow named Alan Funt who had a radio show called Candid Microphone. And they thought, why don't we try it on TV? Candid Camera. And it ran from about 1948 till 1952, and then its heyday was the 1960 to 1967 run, and they've attempted to reboot it several times over the years. But, of course, the camera would be placed in a hidden location, and then someone would confront someone with a bizarre situation, and they'd see how the people would react. You know, one of the premises was if you dress up an insane idea with legitimacy, anyone will believe it regardless of their education or background. Now, as I mentioned, 1960 to 1967 was one of the was ones that, especially with the baby boomers coming of age and television really taking off there in the late 50s. So I wanted to show you a clip from one. The concept is that Delaware, the state of Delaware, is closed for the day.
This is the site of our escapade. We take a railroad crossing bridge and we put on it a simple sign that says, Delaware closed today. Then we get a man with a lantern and another fella with an official looking hat, and he flags down the first passing car, and here's what happens.
I'm sorry to inconvenience you, but they've closed the state of Delaware today.
For what?
Well, the quota's filled. Any other state is fine, dear. You can go into Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey.
What is this?
You don't understand? This is the barrier.
Yes.
This is the state of Delaware on the left.
Yes.
This is the state of Pennsylvania on the right.
Yes.
You're coming from Pennsylvania to Delaware.
Yes.
But the state of Delaware is closed. That's it.
Well, it never has been.
They've closed the state of Delaware today.
They have?
Yes.
That's good.
They're not letting anybody in, you see.
In what areas? How about the other, up further?
No, every part. They're not letting any people into Delaware.
We work out of Delaware.
Well, tomorrow will be fine. We lift the barrier at midnight. They gave us the ruling.
That suits me.
What's that?
That suits me.
Tomorrow you can come back, but not today. See, they left us out here with the orders that we're not supposed to allow anybody into Delaware. It's like spring cleaning. They're fixing everything.
What's wrong with you guys?
Gee, any other state would be fine, but, you know, it's just for today.
Well, okay then.
Okay, thank you. Bye now. Sorry, you can come back tomorrow.
Okay.
It's amazing how when you put something in writing, people are ready to believe it. And even though, you know, our minds try to make sense of something, it's like these people in this particular video. But that's one of the challenges we have with the Bible. And as you know, there are many times where I like to take a look at a Bible passage. And one of them is this idea of the original sin. I know the woman in Wisconsin told the story of how when she was a young girl, she went to Sunday school in her more evangelical Christian church, and the Sunday school teacher had a glass of water, and she poured black dye into it and stirred it up, and of course, you know, you can imagine what it looked like. And the teacher says to the little girl, you know, that this is your soul. It's been stained forever. No matter how hard you try, this is the way it is. And you're stuck with it because, you know, Eve tempted Adam, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the little girl just left the place crying, you know, and just trying to reason in her mind. So, well, what's the point? You know, why even try, you know, to be a Christian? What's the use? You know, and it's oddly because back in 1994, Carla and I were here to do one of our prosperity seminars while Dick Everett was the minister here, and I remember him doing the opposite as a demonstration. He had a a bowl of clear water, and he put the black dye into it, but then he poured something else into it that made it go completely clear. And he was talking about denials and affirmations, just being able to release the negativity. Of course, the other glass of liquid was bleach, and it took all of the dye out of it. Unity, of course, has a very different approach to the Bible. We recognize that we have 66 books, starting with Genesis, ending with Revelation. And there is an arc there. There is an evolution of our consciousness as individual people. We go from Adam consciousness to Christ consciousness. We grow, we evolve, we learn, we make mistakes, and we get better. If you have any doubt, maybe if you've come from a background where you feel like the Bible is the Word of God, crack open your Bible to the letter of the Galatians, 4th chapter, 24th verse. The Apostle Paul, in the 4th chapter, 24th verse of the letter of Galatians, is responding to a person who's talking about one of the stories in the Old Testament, how the person just doesn't understand it. And Paul himself says, well, this is an allegory. It didn't really happen. It's just symbolism. And yet a lot of people feel like Paul is one of the reasons we have the kind of Orthodox Christianity we have today. So to understand the Bible, you need to understand that every person, every character, even every place in the Bible is an aspect of ourselves. And so when we take a look at that evolution from Adam to Christ, you get a better sense that Adam and Eve were at the very base, very start of the awareness that there is a God. In the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, we have the story of let there be light, and let there be this, and all that happens. The world's created, everything seems to be fine, and they start over again. And in the second chapter of Genesis, then they start telling the story of Adam and Eve. Now, a lot of people, come up with the theory, of course, that, what happened was somebody tacked this story onto the beginning of the book of Genesis, and frankly, Genesis is edited together from all of these oral stories that were told, back 3,000 years ago now. But the first story, that story of the let there be light, is the idea of how we are created at the spiritual level and how we can create just as God creates, using our imagination. And then suddenly we've got the story of Adam and Eve. And so we've got spiritual human beings and then physical human beings. And what is it that I say so often? We're spiritual beings having a human experience. No need to be more spiritual. You are spiritual. You just need to be awake to it. So let's take a look at the portion of the Adam and Eve story. I know most of you have heard it. It's one of the best-known stories in the Bible. And that's the fun thing about looking at the symbolism in it, is because there are some stories in the Bible that don't seem to make any sense, but when you understand the symbolism, you see a great spiritual lesson. And then you have stories like this, which most of us learned as kids, and we never thought again to ask. Like the guy at the Delaware border. It's like, what's wrong with you guys? About the story of Adam and Eve. In the book of Genesis, 3rd chapter, 1st and 7th verse, of course, Adam and Eve are there and enjoying what seems to be the good life. But then we read, now the serpent was more subtle than any of the other wild creatures that the Jehovah God had made. And he said to the woman, did God say you shall not eat of any tree of the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden. But God said, thou shalt not eat of the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. The serpent said to the woman, you will not die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate it. And she gave also some to her husband, and he ate it too. Then their eyes were both opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. Now, Adam and Eve are aspects of ourselves. As I said, just like every character of the Bible, every location in the Bible. One of the things, very basic in Bible symbolism, is that all male characters represent our thinking nature. All female characters represent our feeling nature. It's a stereotype, but there it is. Now, in the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, which looks into the original meanings of these various names, these words, we find that Eve means your basic elementary feeling nature, just awakening to the divine. And Adam is your basic elementary thinking nature, just awakening to the divine. We have to have both Adam and Eve in us. That is why earlier in the story it says, well, Adam's alone there, but he needs a companion. And he takes Adam's rib, right? Well, the symbolism of taking from a person's side, a birth from the side, is the virgin birth, is the birth of the heart, the birth of compassion, the birth of feeling. So suddenly Adam and Eve are there together. And think of what you would be like if you were just a thinker or just a feeler. I mean, you wouldn't be much of a person to be around, would you? And this is what was meant when Jesus said in Matthew 19, they were talking about divorce at the time, but he says, what God has put together, let no man pull asunder. Because if you do, you're going to have a schizophrenic crack-up. So at the base of your thinking and feeling nature, there is this generation of energy. There's a level called Eden. All thoughts, all feelings are just simple energy. Thoughts begin to bubble up. In Eden, nothing progressive happens because everything is potential. What is the potential of what you can do with your 12 powers, with your imagination? What can you create? We all have that level within us, but we cannot stay there. We cannot exist in that state. In Genesis, we're told that the serpent entices Eve to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And she also gives some to Adam, and then suddenly they're thrown out of Eden into what is called the world. So what does all of this mean? Well, when we examine, let's take a look at this. Is this good or is this bad? Now consider the serpent. Now in most cultures, especially in the Eastern Hemisphere, the serpent or snakes are considered the symbol of wisdom. And the symbol of medical science, if you ever noticed, is a rod with a snake just circling and spiraling upward on the rod. The snake, of course, resembles our spine. And if you think about the way people probably lived 3,000 years ago, you don't think they were curious? You don't think they dissected other humans after they died? And so there's this aspect that we all kind of have that snake running up us. But the snake is different in that the snake hugs the ground. It just loves the physical world. And it just goes along eating. It's one of those base things. But it has a very special feature, which we all learned in grammar school, right? The snake can throw off death. It can shed its skin and continue to live. So this was the symbolism that people were working with. So you've got this thing that throws off death, shedding its skin, crawls along the ground, and resembles our spine. So the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary tells us the serpent symbolizes our desire to live with our five senses, to move out of that realm of potential and to sense the physical world, to become a spiritual being having a human experience. So to do this, we must acquire polarities. We must acquire hot, cold, there, here, male, female, and of course, good and evil, pleasant and unpleasant. We need to understand the polarities of the physical world. So we emerge from this Eden level of consciousness, and we think, we feel, we live, we work, we grow. And it wouldn't be much of a life if you didn't have your five senses, would it? Now, in this phase of development, we're expelled from the Garden of Eden. Is this good or bad? Well, there are times where I kind of wish I was in Eden. There's this, no worries. Everything seems to be taken care of. Don't need to learn anything. No problems, no challenges. In other words, I can be a vegetable, or I could have remained in the womb. I don't think my mom would have been very happy about that. So Eden in some ways represents that aspect. And it's funny because last week I made a comment about the evolution of the physical body. And I said just before the birth, the soul goes into the body. How do I know that? Well, I know that for me, in doing some breath work, some really heavy meditation and hypnosis, I realized that my consciousness went into the body that I'm in now, in my mother's womb, just before the birth. There was that sudden sense of like, oh, wow, I'm in something here. And I could feel the body, and I could hear noises that would scare me, and then all of a sudden, the walls of the womb collapsed, and the birth came. So, whatever you want to believe about when the soul enters, that was just my experience. Your experience may have been different. So, do we want to remain in the womb? Of course, the question, you've already had the answer. You're sitting here. You decided to exit the womb. So the Eve factor is our willingness to say, okay, I am a spiritual being and I'm ready to have a human experience. I'm ready to go out there. I am ready to confront the original sin. What's that all about? The allegory of Adam and Eve, of course, is explained by mainline, especially the evangelical wing of Christianity, as being why we do stupid things, stupid, harmful things, foolish things. And the packaged answer that people will get is, well, it's because you're disobedient and wicked. So the answer to why am I disobedient and wicked is because you are disobedient and wicked. Doesn't make much sense, does it? The other thing that hasn't been considered from that point of view, and like so many of us learned this like when we were 5 years old, is that if Adam and Eve had not yet partaken of the fruit, of the knowledge from the tree of good and evil, how would they have known that they were being wicked and disobedient? How could they have known the difference between right and wrong? How could they have known the difference between good and bad? So, when we say yes to life, we say, yeah, I'm willing to take my chances. I'm willing to step out and learn what I have decided to learn in this lifetime. I do believe in reincarnation, that we come in so that we can experience all of the various aspects of this physical world. It is our playground for us as spiritual beings. I know I've been male, I know I've been female, I've been rich, I've been poor, I've been articulate, I've been dumb. These are all things we come back to do, to experience. Like Neil Donald Walsh said after he's, in his Conversations with God series, asking God over and over and over again, how many lives have I lived? And finally God says, well, in your case, you've lived, I think it was 735 lives or something like that. So, we want to see, we want to hear, we want to smell, we want to taste, we want to touch. And yes, we'll make some mistakes, but hey, that's part of the job, isn't it? To be able to experience life, to make mistakes, to learn how to do life better. Isn't it interesting that when we're in a room and we see a baby just beginning to walk, the baby will walk and, of course, the baby will fall down. What do people say? What do they do at the time? They praise the baby. Oh, isn't that wonderful? The baby's walking. I've never seen anyone say, oh, boo, bad baby. You tripped, you fell. You did it wrong. No, the baby's willing to get up and try it again until they get it right. And, at age 58, I'm still trying to get it right. But that's the point. So, is wanting to experiment, involve my senses in the many possibilities and making mistakes, evil? Should Eve be condemned or should she be celebrated? Should our emotional and feeling nature be condemned or celebrated? Now, one of the truths about religious studies is that for some reason, this story, the idea of saying yes to life, is affirmed throughout the world. But some reason in the Judeo-Christian tradition, there is this sin element to it. And there is this putting down of the woman element to it. Isn't it interesting that the Holy Trinity is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost? Well, where's the woman? You know, we have to face the reality that the religious tradition that we come from was patriarchal. And they wanted to subdue and sublimate women. So let's break past that. Let's recognize what a wonderful experience having Eve within us has been. There's a lot in each of our lives that we might want to change, but there's much more to life that we wouldn't want to miss. We'll close with a 3-minute video from Steve Hartman of the CBS Evening News. Psychologists have discovered something very interesting about anorexia, where people just stop eating. They find that people who experience anorexia are feeling totally worthless deep inside and are trying to say no to life. So this video I think you'll find interesting.
It's generally not polite to stare at people in a gym, but here at the YMCA in Nashville, Tennessee, there was one college girl named Lauren Lax that some people couldn't help but look at. Couldn't help but notice how thin she was getting. How dangerously thin she was getting. In their minds, Lauren was clearly anorexic.
Her body was just deteriorating. You could see it.
Her eyes were getting kind of gray and sunk in and didn't look good.
They say it was a pity to watch, and most people would have probably left it at that. Just watched. But not these Y members.
We knew what we had to do.
First thing they did was secretly track down Lauren's parents, who lived in another state. Her folks confirmed that Lauren was anorexic and had been since she was about 10. Over the years, she'd been in and out of treatment several times, to no avail. Again, hearing that, most people would have just let it be. But instead, this group began plotting their own intervention.
We can't sit back and one day she not be here because we didn't do something.
It happened here in the parking lot. When Lauren arrived for her workout, they surrounded her car and told her they were taking her to the hospital. Lauren protested. She cried, said, "Leave me alone," pretty forcefully. And yet this random group of people who really barely knew her refused to give up on her.
We said, we're not taking no for an answer. Please, we're just going to take the hospital and have your vital signs checked.
We could not let her get away. If she left us, we'd never see her again.
They all agreed.
Yes.
Especially Lauren.
I don't think I would be here talking today.
It was that desperate?
Yes. At that point, yes.
Lauren says not long after they brought her here to the Vanderbilt Medical Center, her heart came so close to failing, doctors almost had to put in a pacemaker. But she survived that scare, went back into treatment, and now 3 years later, and 36 pounds heavier, she's a new person.
I cannot even express how my mind thinks so differently than I did.
What a gift they gave you.
Yeah.
They gave you your life.
Honestly, no way. I don't think I can say thank you, for how much they were the instigators of starting my recovery. How are you?
See ya.
In our not my problem, every man for himself society, there are still those who believe it takes a village, who help people, not because they're friends or family, but because they're human.
You look so wonderful!
Tomorrow, Lauren is graduating with a doctorate in occupational therapy. She plans to devote her life to helping others with eating disorders, which I think makes for a pretty good thank you. Steve Hartman, on the road, in Nashville.
This from the New Testament, the letter to the Romans, 8th chapter, 28th verse and 31st verse. We know that in everything God works for good with those who love him, those who are called according to his purpose. What then shall we say to this? If God is for us, who can possibly be against us? May you always be open to God's guidance and grace.